Every Tuesday we bring you a full episode about a feature film. Before we get into this week's episode, we want to announce our first ever minisode, where we cover other elements of horror. This Friday, we want to talk about the new Shudder shorter film, Host.
If you like the podcast, don't forget to check us out on Instagram at What Happens in the Crypt. We're also on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.
What episode is this? Episode 9, An American Werewolf in London. I'm not gonna clap, I'm gonna howl. Oh!
God.
Hi there, puppies, doggos, lunatics, and wolves.
Welcome to episode 9 of What Happens in the Crypt.
Today we're talking about the 1981 movie, An American Werewolf in London.
This was written and directed by John Landis.
Landis is also known for directing Michael Jackson's Thriller music video, as well as a lot of SNL cast member-filled comedies such as Blues Brothers, Coming to America, and National Lampoon's Animal House.
Trigger warnings for this episode include gore, nudity, and then imagery and discussion of suicide as well.
The film's plot follows two American backpackers, David and Jack, who are attacked by a creature while traveling in England, causing David to question whether he will become a werewolf under the next full moon and his own sanity. Remember, everyone, keep off the moors and stick to the roads.
Landis, who directed this movie, is known more so for his comedy movies, so this one definitely hits more so on a horror comedy vein than straight up horror.
A lot of people who came to saw this movie were just looking for a laugh, but actually there's some pretty horrifying stuff in this movie.
I even read somewhere that people actually left the theater because they showed up expecting it to be some Animal House, Blues Brothers type funny movie, and then it was gory. The first main scene of the movie follows Jack and David as they show up at this hole-in-the-wall bar called the Slaughtered Lamb, which has the coolest sign design of any bar I would love to go to.
I've wanted a tattoo of it for as long as I can remember. I think since I was 16, I've wanted the tattoo, and I will get it one day.
Yeah, do it.
The werewolf head on the pike, it's so cool.
And they walk inside, and the townspeople are essentially fall silent and are not very helpful or welcoming, but there's a pentagram on the wall, and it's just kind of a spooky atmosphere.
And when Jack asks about the pentagram, the townspeople act like he had just shot somebody.
Yeah, it's very strange.
There's the guy who's playing darts the whole time. He's like, "You made me miss."
Right.
I never miss.
They're hostile.
Excuse me. What's that scar on the wall for? You made me miss. Sorry. I've never missed that board before.
Obviously, the bar was super uncomfortable for them, so they decide to leave. And it's when they leave the Slaughtered Lamb that they come across the wolf, the lunatic, the monster, whatever you want to call it.
Stick to the roads. Oops. I love that so much.
Oh my God.
Stick to the road. Oops. I vote we go back to the Slaughtered Lamb. Yeah.
Lost and now on the moors, they begin to start hearing this howling, growling mix of all of the above, and it sounds like something is circling them and getting closer and closer.
It pretty quickly takes down Jack, and David, who's the main character of this movie, is a total wuss and just runs away as fast as he can while his BFF is getting mauled to death.
Literally shredded. And then he's just, he turns around and he's like, Jack.
He's after the 10th time he hears his best friend screaming for him, was oh, maybe I should go back.
Yeah, Jack is just it's killing me.
Right.
And he's like, okay, I'll turn around.
But he just runs.
Jack. Jack.
I love that shot though when the townspeople finally show up and David had just been like scratched and I think he gets bitten like once, and then they shoot the creature and then David is just looking straight up into the night sky, and then he just slowly looks over and he just sees that naked guy, just holes blown in him and blood pouring out of him. Super creepy.
It's a really cool way to show that it was like a werewolf type character, because we saw the fur and the fangs and everything in very quick motions, but then while he's laying there injured, he actually turns and sees just a man. So that's a really cool way to do it. David ends up at the hospital. He finds out that Jack didn't make it and that he's been there for like 3 weeks in a coma.
Yeah, it's 3 weeks, and he's now in London.
While he's at the hospital one morning, he wakes up and Jack is there in the corner and he's totally mauled and he's super bloody and gory, and he's just like, "Hey dude, how's it going?"
He actually asks for a piece of toast.
Yeah.
Can I have a piece of toast? Get the fuck out of here, Jack. Thanks a lot. No, I can't take this. Am I asleep now, awake, or what?
I realize I don't look so hot, David. But I thought you'd be glad to see me.
In this scene, Jack starts to warn David of what really happened that night, and that Jack is not a ghost, he is the undead, and he can't pass on now.
Right. The whole premise is essentially that he's in limbo until the line of the werewolves is ended. So that prompts Jack to continually throughout the movie tell David that he has to kill himself in order to free his soul, essentially.
In this scene, he's trying to convince David, to end his life just so he doesn't end up killing others.
The last remaining werewolf must be destroyed. It's you, David.
What?
Please believe me. You'll kill people.
Nurse!
Listen to me!
Nurse!
The supernatural, the power of darkness, it's all true. The undead surround me. Have you ever talked to a corpse? It's boring. I'm lonely. Take your life, David. Kill yourself.
The makeup in the scene is super cool too. As Jack continues to appear, he's slowly decomposing. So this first appearance, he's like really like fresh and bloody, and it's like his skin is like drooping off of him. But like the next time we see him, he's more skeletal and he gets more corpsey as it goes on, and that's a really cool effect.
Rick Baker did a great job with all of the makeup in this movie.
Probably my favorite scene in this movie is one of the dream sequences where David thinks that he's running naked through the woods. It's like the werewolf curse is in his veins and he can feel like his need to be out in nature. And he comes across himself in a hospital bed. He basically peeks around a tree to look at himself, and there's this quick flash where he sees himself like transforming into a monster, but it's just his face. So he has these really gigantic monster fangs and he has these bright yellow eyes, and it's like the sound effect is really cool.
Yeah, and it's very jarring. It's a really loud sound effect, and it's very quick, and the makeup is super cool.
David actually said that the contacts were super painful because this movie came out in the 80s, so they're actually made of glass. And I think that's why they didn't do this effect further throughout the movie or show him transitioning like that anymore.
Also, they were actually in the middle of the woods. They said it was freezing when they were there.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really cool.
One of the most memorable scenes of this movie is also one of the most jarring scenes of the movie. This was what really was the biggest horror factor for a lot of people. This dream sequence depicts David at home with his family, and they're just sitting down to a nice meal, when all of a sudden these half mutated, half werewolf Nazis.
I call them werewolf Nazis.
I think that's what they're referred to as. They just burst into the house quick. They just gun down the dad, kick down the doors. They start shooting the whole family. They even kick over the TV that's playing the Muppets. And then they grab a log and they start setting fire to the house.
Right, and the one werewolf Nazi that grabs David is super terrifying, and like his face is horrible, and he ends up slitting David's throat. It's super gory.
Yeah, and he wakes up from the nightmare, and then he's in his hospital bed, and then one of the werewolves jumps from the window and stabs the nurse like 10 times, just blood everywhere.
Right, a dream within a dream, which is always the worst.
Hello? Have you been up long?
I've just had a nightmare.
Not to worry, I've just the thing.
You notice in that scene there were a lot of really quick cuts, and it never really showed the werewolf faces for very long. This was because Rick Baker, the head effects artist for this movie, he didn't have a real team behind him. Most of the people that worked on this movie, other than him, were his fans and people he was teaching. So he didn't actually have time to do everything for this movie. So the faces for these Nazi werewolf hell patrol were made by these younger people who didn't have the experience that he had, and they didn't have quite as much time. But it still looked pretty cool, but that's why the faces don't articulate. They don't move at all.
That makes sense, and it definitely works for the scene because they're wearing helmets and it's so fast, like, you're not looking for mistakes within the makeup either. It reads as werewolf Nazis, so they did a good job.
Yeah.
Eventually, David gets discharged from the hospital, and he's struck up a little romance with Nurse Alex, and he ends up going to stay with her, which leads to my favorite line of the whole movie, which is Alex saying to David, "I find you terribly attractive and a little bit sad."
And then they take a shower, of course. You know, that's what's got to happen next. And then one of the longest sex scenes of all time.
It is never ending. It's not super attractive either. It's just awkward and long.
It's like between 2 and 3 minutes.
And it feels like 10 minutes.
After a few days of their new romance, it happens to be a full moon. Also, the night that Alex happens to have a night shift.
Of course, because how else would that happen? David's like wandering around the apartment, bored because Alex is at work. He sits down to read a book, and then suddenly he's overtaken by this agonizing pain, and he starts to transform.
Yeah, I like how they did that with this movie, where he's like screaming in pain, ripping his clothes off. He's like instantly covered in sweat, and you can see the pain in his eyes as his body starts to transform.
Jesus Christ! Without a tree. What? God! What? Oh! I'm burning up!
Yeah, I feel like it's one of the more realistic lead-ups to a transformation as far as like a werewolf thing goes.
Yeah, I can't imagine your limbs popping out of socket and your spine rearranging. I don't think that's going to be very comfortable. You know, your jaw, suddenly gaining extra teeth and popping and expanding. That probably doesn't feel so good.
Yeah.
His first victims are just trying to go to a fancy dinner party.
However, they were trying to pull a prank and scare their friends.
Yeah, don't you always enter your friend's apartment through the back where you have to walk through a forest in complete darkness on a full moon?
I'm just saying they deserved it a little bit. Pranks where you think someone might be breaking in or something along those lines are not funny.
One thing I really do like about this scene is when the friend finally discovers their bodies, is you don't just see like a corpse or just a bloodied person. He just finds like a wrist and a hand. It's super disturbing. and gory.
I love that during the actual attack as well, the woman inside the apartment is like, those teens are at it again in the park. And it's like truly her friends getting mauled to death.
Yeah, ripped apart by a werewolf.
After he murders the couple behind their apartment, we see like through David's werewolf eyes that he is attacking a few homeless people, but there's not too much to that scene. We just see that he's there.
They actually did shoot that entire scene, but to keep an R rating, they had to cut it.
Of course. From there, he moves on to the subway, which is a really fun scene where he's chasing this guy throughout, and he like loses his umbrella, he drops his suitcase, he falls on an escalator.
Yeah, I like the shot where you can actually see the full werewolf. They're at like, the shot is like the top of the escalator, and the guy's slowly going up, but he's falling down, and then just this werewolf walks into frame, and you know he's done for.
It's very menacing. After his first night of this killing spree, he wakes up in the wolf cage at the zoo. There were 3 wolves who were in the cage with him, and as far as like shooting the scene, they were apparently docile, but David did actually have to be naked for this scene. And he said in many articles that this was the scariest to shoot. There were trainers on hand, but this was actually at a zoo, and they were not trained wolves. You can train wolves, but they were at a zoo, so they're like rehabilitated, probably like injured wolves that were born and raised in the wild. So there's like not a lot that you can do there. The plan for this shot was for him to wake up in the wolf cage, the wolves would be there, and he would just kind of slink out the top. But when they went to shoot it, the wolves were really interested in him, and it scared him. And that's why it looks like he flees so quickly. That was actually like a real response as far as the actor playing David got really scared of the wolves. But when you watch the scene, you can tell by their body language that they really were just investigating. They were friendly, but it still would have been terrifying to have to lay naked in a wolf cage, and then the wolves did something you weren't expecting.
This scene has some of the funniest moments in the movie, starting with him after he exits the cage. He's hiding in a bush, completely naked.
David gestures to like a little boy that's watching the monkeys that he's like this great balloon thief, and he'll give him money if he gives him the balloons. And of course, this is all a trick. He steals the balloons, uses them to cover his junk, and takes off running.
Next, this little kid goes up to his mom, and he just like tugs on her coat, and it just says to her, "Mama," what does he say? A naked American man stole my balloons." And then it cuts to him just sprinting with these balloons, and then he steals somebody's coat, a lady's coat.
All of the shots that they did at the zoo were supposed to be done by like 9 a.m., but for some reason they were running behind, and the zoo opened while they were still filming. So David was naked around a bunch of regular zoo goers. And he had said in an interview that he had said to the director, "When did all these extras get here?" And they were like, "Oh, they're not extras, the zoo's open." And he was just standing around naked.
After a failed attempt of getting arrested, David sees Jack outside of none other than a porno theater. Fun fact, the porno that is playing in this movie was made just for the movie. And it's actually really funny. It's
hilarious.
It's that one. The big buff guy walks into the room, and he's like, he's like, "I thought you said you'd never do this to me again." And she's just like,
"I've never seen you before in my life."
And he's just like, "Oh," and leaves.
Yeah, it's wild.
Like, what? There's some of that Blues Brothers Animal House comedy, because I crack up every time I see that.
When we see Jack during this scene, he's now essentially a skeleton with little bits of flesh hanging off of him. But
his eyes are so creepy in this, because
no eyelids,
and he doesn't have lips in this scene either. So it's weird to see this just jaw moving, and then him still being able to speak perfectly. It's unsettling.
Right, and this time it's not just Jack, but it's also everyone that David murdered the night before.
Yeah, this is where David's, like, oh shit moment is he's forced to confront everybody that he's killed.
Right, and once again, they're all just telling him that he has to kill himself to end this and to free them from this purgatory they're stuck in.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments is all the people he's killed are all at the same time coming up with ways that he, like, the best way to kill himself.
Right.
All the while, you just hear a porno in the background.
It's an odd choice of venue for this scene.
I think it adds to it. I think it makes it so much. It's such a wild scene. Because there's porno in the background. There's harder. A lot of that, and then it's just like, you could hang yourself. Well, that might not work. You might
slit your wrist. Shoot yourself.
Shoot yourself. Get in the car crash. And the one homeless guy's just like, one of them's like, shoot yourself. Yeah, you could point the gun to your forehead. And the homeless guy's just like, I know where you can get a gun. They're just like, yeah.
They're very resourceful.
I want you to meet some people. David Kessler, this is Gerald Bringsley. Gerald's the man you murdered on the subway. We thought it best for you not to see him, as he's a fresh kill and still pretty messy.
Yes. I do look most unpleasant.
Why are you doing this to me?
This isn't Mr. Goodman's idea. He's your good friend, whereas I am a victim of your carnivorous lunar activities.
Mr. Bringsley, I'm sorry. I have absolutely no idea what to say to you.
You've left my wife a widow, and my children fatherless. And I understand I am to walk the earth in limbo, one of the living dead, until the wolf's bloodline is severed and the curse lifted. You must die, David Kessler.
David, this is Harry Berman and his fiancée, Judith Browns.
Hello.
Hello.
And these gentlemen are Alf, Ted, and Joseph.
Can't say we're pleased to meet you, Mr. Kessler.
What shall I do?
Suicide.
You must take your own life.
That's easy for you to say. You're already dead.
No, David. Harry and I and everyone you murder are not dead. The undead.
Why are you doing this to me?
Because this must be stopped.
In the midst of this conversation with Jack, David starts to transform again.
That poor usher that goes up to confront him as he's transforming because he's grabbing onto the seat in front of him and David's just screaming and he's just like, I think he says like, you better run, you gotta get out of here. And then he just turns full werewolf and starts to tear people apart, and that's when they grab the police, and the police try to close like the shutters of the theater, and you just hear like the screaming and the howling from the inside.
Of course, that's short-lived, that they can keep him contained with like a metal
A very thin shutter
thing. So he breaks free and causes the most ridiculous car crash possibly ever in a movie.
Well, yeah, but before that, he breaks out, and then immediately, it's like the police chief is there. He shows up because all these murders are happening, and he instantly rips his head off.
Right.
And that's like how the car crash starts, because he throws the head into traffic.
I forgot that the head started the car
Yeah, the head
crash.
starts rolling, and then David himself as Werewolf is running into the traffic, and all these cars start crashing, and all these people are like flying out of the cars and running each other over.
Chaos.
It's pure chaos. I think this is the scene that has like the highest death count in this movie.
For sure, because there's truly like 10 cars that end up colliding.
And that huge bus.
Mm-hmm. From here, David escapes down an alleyway. He's totally cornered, and the police and Alex end up walking up to him, and she's trying to convince him that she loves him, that he's human in there. Essentially, that whole trope.
Yeah, but the power of love does not work this time. The power of bullets work this time. Yeah, they shoot him like 4 times, and then there's just naked, again, human David. Just, yep, full of holes. R.I.P., but it's a good ending. Like,
it is a really good ending. It's really satisfying, because I hate any movie that ends with the woman saying, "I love you," though, and they come back because it's bullshit.
Are you calling out 2 episodes ago? I love Nightmare on Elm Street too, but yeah, that ending is it's a bit of a cop out when it's just the power of love, and then everything's all fine again.
I'm sorry, if you turn into a werewolf, if I scream at you, "Wait, I love you," you're not gonna turn back into a person.
I'm just gonna keep killing.
You're gonna kill me.
I'm gonna keep killing.
And that's what nature does.
Yeah, and then, because also, he gets shot dead, and then all of his victims can finally be free. So it's a it's not great.
It's a satisfying ending.
Yeah, it's what it needed.
David. They're going to kill you. David. Please. Please let me help you. I love you, David.
Other than the horror comedy aspects that this movie has, another reason why this is one of my favorite movies of all time is the makeup and special effects. One of my favorite things a movie can do is have no CGI, and this movie does it. There is no CGI in this movie. Jack's makeup is some of the best I have ever seen in this movie, and the werewolf transformations are so awesome. The werewolf that is seen running on all fours, you'll notice that you never really see the back end, and this is because it's a man in a werewolf suit. So he's controlling the front arms and the head, and he's just kind of moving his arms to make it look like the werewolf is running, but in reality, the back end, it's a guy laying on a wooden plank in a wheelbarrow, and 2 other guys are pushing him along, and this makes it look like he's running, but it's just a guy in a suit pushed along.
I need to see a picture of the people. I love the premise of it.
On YouTube, there is video of it.
Oh my god, amazing.
And obviously, there are shots where you can see the whole werewolf, but you'll notice that when you can see the whole werewolf, it's not running. So, yeah, there's no CGI in this. So there were different werewolves made for, if the werewolf is just sitting down, it's just a guy in a suit. The back legs don't need to move, so that there's no need to have people pushing it along. When he's actually running it's when it's that
that's
crazy
when it's
wheelbarrow time. The actor that plays Jack, his name in real life is Griffin Dunn, and I am so sorry if I say that wrong, but it's what I'm saying. He was interviewed about his makeup and his transformation from, young American handsome guy to literal corpse. He actually said in an interview that at first the makeup depressed him. And it's not because obviously he had to sit down for a long time, but that's not why. He would sit down, 4 or 5 hours to get his makeup done. But he said the makeup was so good that he could see himself being dead. He saw himself as a corpse.
That's so interesting too, because I love playing around with makeup and special effects and stuff, but I've never had anything good enough done on my face to ever feel that way. And it definitely would be otherworldly upsetting.
Yeah, he actually told his mom not to see the movie because she was ill when it came out, and he thought that might push her over the edge. He thought her seeing that might kill her, seeing her son as a corpse.
That's crazy.
Jack's makeup had a happy accident in it, and Rick Baker, the makeup artist, even acknowledges it as a happy accident. But you see, the first time you see Jack, his throat is all torn apart, and every time he's talking, you'll notice some of the bits jiggle and move around, and that was not done on purpose. In an interview that you can watch on YouTube, Rick Baker said that only happened after they applied the prosthetic and then they covered it in like ooze and blood, and only after did they like make it all wet and gross that's when it began to jiggle when he talked.
It adds like a very realistic aspect to it though, because obviously if your skin is ripped open, it's not going to stay glued to you. It's going to move around when you talk and walk around.
You can't talk about this movie without talking about David's transformations. Rick Baker actually refers to his mechanical creations as changeo parts, changeo limbs. So he actually cast, the actor that played David, he cast his limbs in rubber and latex. So he had actual molds of his arms and legs and head in different faces. He would have him do different facial expressions and have like prosthetic teeth in, so that for his transformation scenes, you know, David's looking at his arm as it's starting to stretch, but it's not his arm. It's like a fake that somebody's just holding up, and then it has a like mechanical bit in it, so it's stretching and getting longer and bigger. And for this, they had to use a new kind of like polymer rubber thing that like nobody has like really used that much. So that was interesting to like learn about, because they couldn't use like foam or anything because it would tear. So they had to find something that looked like skin and could stretch. And then lastly on that is when his face is changing, that's not even David. That's not even an actor in there. That's a whole fake head. It was so crazy watching like behind the scenes and videos of that, because his like jaws extending in it. They put sounds of him like screaming and groaning in pain, but it's like a robot essentially. It's fake.
That's baffling to me too, because it does look so much like David. Of course, it is like a cast of his face, but it doesn't read like an animatronic face in that scene at all. It absolutely looks like maybe like a time-lapse makeup or something like that.
That is actually specifically what they didn't want to do in this movie. They set out to do something new. Rick Baker said that he was going to do no time-lapse makeup because that's how they had been doing it for decades previous. And that was my makeup special effects tangent. Just kidding. Last bit of tangent on the makeup in this movie is that they did so much prep work for this that when they got to set, it was like a one and done. So Rick actually got upset when they were on like the actual shoot day, when they go to, he spent months and months working on these changeo limbs that worked perfectly. They looked so good on camera that they only got used for 10 seconds. But he had spent so much time on it that he got upset. But in reality, he did his job so good that it saved them time. And he said, when I actually sat down in the theater and we all watched it, all of my emotion just went to pride and happiness. It looked amazing. It came out perfectly, exactly how I wanted it.
It would be such a bummer, though, if you spent such an obscene amount of time creating this makeup thing, this animatronic thing, and then they're like, yeah, we're done with it already. Thanks.
One of my favorite quotes in this movie is because my dad loves this movie, and when I was a kid, he would say it to me all the time, and he would just say, "Have you ever been severely beaten around your face and neck?"
It's so good.
When I was acting like a little jerk when I was a kid, he'd just be like, "Do I have to beat you around the face and neck?" And when I was really little, I didn't get it. And then it was only when I first saw this movie and I was like, you got it from this?
All the songs in this movie feature the word moon. It starts with that song Blue Moon. Every single song has to do with it. John Landis wanted to use Cat Stevens' song Moonshadow for the opening credits, but Cat Stevens refused because he apparently believes werewolves really exist, and he didn't want to contribute to the movie. The score for this movie was created by Elmer Bernstein, who's worked on a ton of stuff, but he's mainly known for creating the score for Cape Fear and Ghostbusters.
You'll notice in this movie that there's not a whole lot of Sunshine and great weather. Well, this was done on purpose. Landis purposefully chose the filming dates and times to be during bad weather. He picked specifically to go to England in February and March, when it is cold and rainy and sad.
The moors were filmed around the Black Mountains in Wales, and East Proctor is actually a really tiny village called Crickedarn. The other weird thing about the filming locations was An American Werewolf in London was the first film allowed to shoot in Piccadilly Circus in over 15 years, and the only way they were able to make this happen was John Landis had just directed Blues Brothers, and he let the whole police force watch it for free before it was in theaters, and they allowed him to shoot for 2 days in the area.
The chief of police in London just going, what's in it for us?
Just give us Blues Brothers. When they're leaving the slaughtered lamb, the howl you actually hear was made up of about 9 different sounds. They wanted it to be a noise that you literally could be like, what is that? And they said they created it by combining the sound of a wolf, a lion, a panther, and a car. And then there's another sound that you hear later on in that scene after the first attack, and it's actually a pig farm recorded from the distance. So that really adds a weird mystery aspect because it doesn't just sound like a howl. None of the noises you hear sound like a wolf or something that you'd be familiar with, and it's because they layered the noises so much.
The visuals in this film were so iconic and so well done that this was the first year that the Academy Awards recognized it. In 1981, Rick Baker and his team were given the very first Academy Award for their makeup in this movie. I'm not speaking for both of us here when I give my rating for this movie. The mix of comedy and horror is some of the best I've ever seen. The practical effects put into this project put most of today's CGI to shame. An American Werewolf in London is a movie I have been watching since I was a kid, and I will continue to watch. And it will always be one of my favorites.
I've seen it a handful of times now, and it's definitely worth a watch. I always love a horror comedy, so it's good for that aspect. I think that you love it more so because of the nostalgic factor, and I get it. It's a good movie. It's definitely worth watching.
I have probably seen this movie 30 times.
I've seen it 3 times.
You can currently watch it on Hulu. There are so many deaths in this movie that we cannot go over them all individually.
Between dreams and reality and werewolf maulings and car accidents, there are 27 deaths in this movie.
That's our highest kill count to date. The reason why we're including the dream deaths is because they're just so brutal, and some of those deaths were some of the scariest, and those deaths are, for some people, what made you leave a theater or what gave you nightmares.
Right. Next week, we're talking about one of my favorite kinds of horror movies, which is where you're trapped and there's no way out. So we're going to be talking about the 2005 movie, The Descent.